priest, Kunja then boldly replied, "It is you who's been ambitious, plotting to get rid of the Cereburus. Whatever in the world made you think you will ever succeed?" "Oh, I will. I can assure you. I will have them all massacred at their first attempt to enter my kingdom. You know that I can," the king affirmed. Kunja frowned at that. He was about to say something when they heard King Banjugo below from behind him. "My God! What is this?" He came in riding from afar with his guards and Kubra in tow. They seemed to have been led there by her. She had secretly run to go tell the king what was going on. Kunja didn't let his king come any closer to the scene. He immediately rushed towards him, determined to keep him as far away from King Sayumba as possible. He knew that the moment they exchanged words, his secret would be out, and that was something he could not deal with at this point of time. "Your Majesty," Kunja screamed, trying to figure out the best way to tell the king what happened. King Sayumba's army had already overpowered most of the Cereburus, and the rest had run on the arrival of King Banjugo. Banjugo looked really unsettled by the scene in front of him. He watched as King Sayumba rode off with his army and wondered why he was leaving without an explanation. He hadn't even given the approved date for their meeting. King Sayumba was hurting, but he still managed to turn back and look at King Banjugo. He also stopped to stare at the woman who stood near him. She seemed very familiar, but he couldn't place her. "What in the God's name is the meaning of this?" He heard King Banjugo shout, but he did not have the time to explain the events that had just unfolded. He needed to leave immediately so he could tend to his wound before the poison kills him. King Sayumba rode off with his army, riding as fast as they could. "Your Majesty, King Sayumba came in to attack me." Kunja jumped in to explain when King Sayumba disappeared into the woods with his men. King Banjugo stared at him with an expression that made him realize he needed to explain further. "Why in the God's name would Sayumba do that?" "I was the one person who didn't want you all to have your meeting, remember?" Kunja continued. He added that King Sayumba's real intentions with the meeting was to get rid of King Banjugo and to take over Kingdom Jeli as well. The priest's story sounded ridiculous to the king. He knew since then that there was more to the story than meets the eye. "You heard what he said he could do to the Cereburus. Why then would he need your Majesty's help in getting rid of them?" Kunja concluded, believing he might have succeeded in swaying the king to his side. Even though the king had heard Sayumba threaten to annihilate the Cereburus if they dared to attack his kingdom, he still did not think that was enough to believe everything Kunja had told him. Kunja knew that the king would do everything in his power to get to the bottom of today's event, so he planned on staying close to his associates to keep track of his every move. He promised himself that he was going to make Kubura pay for calling the king and ruining all his hard work. When he was told that King Sayumba still lived, he was excruciatingly infuriated. Since Kubra had been in captivity with him since he found her, after continuously raping her very maliciously, he handed her over to the Cereburus to do whatever it is they wanted to do with her, and then kill her. He also advised them to stay clear of the kingdom of Tongunte, at least for the time being. He advised them to lay low and wait for the right time to strike, and they will strike so hard that Tongu will be left with no choice but to surrender. In the meantime, Queen Tati had returned to the palace to look after her husband. King Sayumba had become very unwell since his visit to Njeli. Even though he had the antidote in time to get rid of the poison, he was still hurt and was under bed rest. Queen Tati had returned to look after her king, promising that she would let the girl stay in the palace as his ward since it was her king's desire. The king was very happy that she had finally come to terms with him on this. She had a plan to make the wretched girl lose all credibility in the eyes of the king, but for now, her focus was on nursing the king back to health. While the king was ill, little Lale would always come to the king's chambers to secretly watch the king being attended to. She would hide behind the curtains, making sure she remained unseen by the two guards, who always stood by the entrance of King Sayumba's chambers. They were there by the queen's command, and they were ordered to not let anyone into his chambers, especially Lalia. Therefore, Lalia will hide there and watch the king from a distance for an opportunity to slip in. That opportunity finally presented itself a fortnight since the king was wounded. When Queen Tati left, she snuck in behind the curtains in order to have a look at how the king's wound was healing. While she was in the king's chambers, the two guards found her and chased her away. The commotion woke the king, and when he saw Lalia, He ordered them to leave her alone and let her in. Little Lalia timidly walked towards the king with her head down. She sat beside him and he smiled at her, asking after how she was doing. She nodded and answered that she was fine, and then proceeded to ask, "How do you feel now, Your Majesty?" Her head was still down, trying to steal a glance at him. "I'm getting better." "How about the scar on your face?" "It doesn't hurt anymore now, Your Majesty, but the scar won't go away. I am searching for the Ajulu herb to make it go away. Mother used to grow it in our farm." "Your mother is a herbalist?" "Yes, Your Majesty. She treated most of our neighbors." She finally looked up at him. "The Ajulu could make your bruise go away too." She pointed to the king's legs. "It can?" Her statement amused him. "Yes, Your Majesty. The Ajulu herb is really good. It makes any scar disappear. It can even heal mortal wounds so long as the one with the wound has the will to leave. And I can go get it from our farm with your permission." "That's fine then. Permission granted." The king obliged. There was something about the girl that he just liked. He had a soft spot for her. He watched as Lalia took her leave of him, bowing as she left. Lalia bumped into the queen just by the entrance of the king's chambers as she was leaving. Queen Tati cringed and crouched down to speak to the little girl. Lalia could feel shivers run through her spine as she tried to whisper to her, I'm sorry, Your Majesty." Little Lalia stammered as the queen scares her. She always made sure she stayed away from the queen's path. She does all she can to avoid crossing paths with her, but this happened so fast she couldn't do a thing about it. "Were you temporarily deaf when I warned you to stay away from the king?" She whispered to her so the king won't hear, as she was sure he was watching. Little Lalia shuddered at her menacing tone and terrifyingly watched the queen as she pretended to be adjusting her blouse. "Next time, I will see to it that you lose your ears for disobeying my orders, you wretched girl." She hugged little Lalia, urging her to smile, and she did. "Now get out," she firmly spat, still whispering. Little Lalia ran out as fast as her legs could carry her. "The girl is really sweet, isn't she?" King Sayumba said after seeing the queen nicely kiss little Lalia and adjust her blouse. He was unaware of what really transpired between them, so he believed that his queen was also gradually taking a liking to her. Yes, very sweet indeed," Queen Tati agreed with a bright smile on her face.